In the last session, I forgot to make mention of one important point which comes up when we try to cross psychoanalysis with Yoga Sutras, and that is what is healing, what all heals. In psychoanalysis, we believe reflecting, not acting. We believe in making the unconscious conscious and catharting out the feelings. And this leads to healing, or to use a more technical word, restructuring. Holistic healing tells us that apart from these tools of interpretation and catharsis, many other tools work contributing towards healing. Self-expression works, self-acceptance works, internalization of a good object works, experiencing a good relationship works, creating a healthy self works, and similarly, Eastern tradition tells us that use of mantra, use of visualization, idol therapy, spiritual rituals, pranayama, energy work like pranic healing, Reiki, acupressure or acupuncture, or some specific type of combination of body work and energy work, as we see in some of the uh, Shaolin martial schools or other martial schools, martial arts. All of this works, which means whatever entity is at the core of pathology, it is definitely influenced by all these healing entities. Which healing entity will work, how much, for whom, in what condition, that is the central question of holistic healing, which has to be answered over the next 25 years. But last session tells us that recitation and contemplation on Om as a mantra can lead to purification of the psyche, establishment of peace in the psyche, overcoming of this racing thoughts, this anxiety, this haste, this restlessness of the psyche, and can lead us to supernormal states of peace, bliss, composure, and evolution. Today we'll take forward our journey into Yoga Sutras, and we'll look at Yoga Sutras 31 to 40. 31 to 40, many of the Yoga Sutras are self-evident, easy to understand, don't require much of commentary. So if we find time today, we'll take up 41 to 51 also. And with completion of 51 sutras, we will complete the first chapter of Yoga Sutras, the chapter of Samadhi. And in the first chapter, essentially what Patanjali is doing is defining the goal state of Samadhi, some intermediate states which can lead to the goal state, and some aids which can help us to get to the goal state. So this is what he is doing in the first chapter. And obviously this chapterization has been made by different people. So you may find certain books where the chapterization can be slightly different. So let us look at today's session 31 to 40. This is an easy session does not require much commentary. Patanjali talks about what can a suffering mind, what can a scattered and distracted mind lead us to? It can lead us to suffering, ignorance, loss over the control of limbs, labored breath. So when he says distracted and scattered mind, he is not meaning or referring to an ordinary distraction or scattering of a normal person who very soon will get control over it by its own accord. If we look at what he is suggesting, suffering, loss of control over limbs, labored breath, obviously he is talking about some pathological states of mind. So he is referring to distraction and scattering of a very high order. And we see in psychoanalysis how this is always found: distraction, scattering, lack of concentration, lack of composure, restlessness, anxiety. When the anxiety becomes too high, one gets into labored breath, or if the anxiety goes into limbs, somatizes, we have this loss of control over limbs. So he says, if the mind is scattered, distracted, or in language of psychoanalysis, if we say mind is suffering from pathology, this is all the suffering it undergoes. And of course, we see it all the time in psychoanalysis, that what he's saying is true when the distraction and scattering enters the realm of pathology. One and only way to overcome these distractions is to practice oneness with the pure object. Psychoanalysis will not agree to this statement, that this is the only way to cure. But Patanjali says this. Psychoanalysis would go into the causes of scattering and distraction and find out the phenomena, whether it is Oedipus or anal fixation or oral rage fixation or development of an unhealthy self or lack of internalization of a good object, or the split is open, or the torturous rage towards the parents has not come out, or I am not good enough is at work, either directly or as a defense. Catastrophic thinking is at work, either as a generic problem or as a defense. A good relationship, a good enough parent has never been experienced. And then psychoanalysis work upon that so that this distraction, the scattering, the anxiety, the rage goes away, and one is able to enter into a state of peace and composure to live a happy, productive, and creative and playful life. So psychoanalysis would differ from Patanjali on this point, that the only way to get into a good state of peace, composure, happiness, creativity, playfulness, and bliss is to practice oneness with a pure object. In fact, other schools of Indian psychology and Indian spirituality also will differ, because the Hatha Yoga school will say, we want to get over it using asanas and physical exercises. Pranayam also will be deployed. Those who practice idol therapy will say, we want to overcome this with idol therapy. Those who practice energy work will say, we want to purify the chakras and get into a state of peace by purifying the aura and the chakra and the nadis. So there would be differences when Patanjali says eka, only, then the problem starts. If he says this is the way to peace, composure, happiness, productivity, creativity, playfulness, a good state to live life, no problem. But if he says this is the only way, only is the problem. And the only comes from eka. If by eka he means one object or essence of one object, it would not be a problem. But if by eka he means only method, then it's a problem. And this is the translation I have found in most of the books, something related to this, near to this. But I find it difficult to accept this because Patanjali himself mentions a variety of ways to reach samadhi, and therefore when he says eka only or one, I would say he probably meant, or maybe this core language, this core statement itself has been changed in the course of transmission over thousands of years, because this seems out of place. Patanjali is a very open and holistic person who himself gives so many ways to reach samadhi. So it's very unlikely that he would say this is the only way. Rather, what is more probable is he can be saying that one way would be to take any one object and practice oneness with that object. And obviously the object referred to is a pure object, some good object. So this is what my feeling is, but I have put it as I have seen in most of the books. I am not sure if this translation is correct or even this core statement is correct. So I believe Patanjali wanted to say that one way to get away from the distracted, scattered mind is to practice oneness with a pure object. But as it comes out in most books, it is said this is the only way, which I don't think he meant. Let me just correct it. It's something. This gives me more peace, more acceptable. One way to overcome these distractions is to practice oneness with a good object of contemplation. Maybe verbatim, this is not the correct translation, but this seems to be more correct in terms of meaning. And this seems to be more in tune with Patanjali, who across the whole Yoga Sutras is giving multiple ways to reach Samadhi. Almost looks like the earlier translation almost looked like something which was not Patanjali. One point 33 number sutra. Yeah, so I think we are on the correct track because now he's giving other ways to attain the same deliverance from distraction and scattering. He says the mind becomes peaceful, blissful, and composed. And composed. When feelings of friendliness, compassion, objectivity, and freedom It states arise towards objects of pleasure and pain, papa and punya. Papa is good deeds, papa is bad deeds which bring demerits in karmic terms, increases the karmic load, and punya is something good, good deeds that help you accumulate good karma and overcome the difficult karma. It is like sin and virtue. Papa is sin and punya is virtue. So he says, so he talks about 31, the suffering because of a distracted and scattered mind. In psychoanalysis, we can call it a pathological mind, mind with a pathology. So in 31, Sutra he talks about the suffering because of a scattered and distracted mind. We would call a mind with pathology. And one way to overcome these distractions and this suffering is to practice oneness with an object of contemplation. It's a very important part of idol therapy. Having an object of contemplation and then entering into relationship with that object. Patanjali is not explaining those parts, but they are implicit because he's talking in the context of a culture where idol therapy is a very popular form of therapy, popular form of spiritual work. They don't use the word therapy, they use the word spiritual work, spiritual sadhana. So what he is talking about here in 32 is what is called tanmayata, sorry, ekatmata, oneness. So in idol therapy, what happens is you create a idol, and how to create an idol, whether it should be a human idol or a non-human idol, a male or a female, an adult or a child, what should be its personality, what should be its form, that's a complete science by itself, how to create an idol. And then how to relate to an idol. How should the relationship rituals be? What should one practice on an everyday basis? That's again a science into itself. And what happens internally as you proceed to do it, and then you report it to the guru and he guides you in the process till the objective of this idol therapy is overcome. For example, if the objective is to overcome isolation of affect, you are not able to relate to anybody in terms of feelings, you don't feel anything. So you create an idol and you start relating to that idol in emotional terms. So first you create something that is easy to relate to based on your personality, your pathology, your gender, everything put there. So the guru helps you to create an idol, then relate to it, and then slowly when you spend a lot of time relating to the idol, you get into a state which is called tanmayata. You become obsessively interested in the idol. Not obsessively, but I would say persistently interested in the idol. And then comes the state of tadrupta, where you start partially identifying with the object. You're not only obsessed with the relating to the object, but there is a partial identification going on. And a ceaseless relating is going on in the internal world. And then it's ekatmata, oneness. The identification is complete. The part of the object to be made your own has been made your own. And this can take various forms. It can just end in the psychological complete identification and a transmuting internalization, or it can go into a pathological direction of fusion, or it can go into a spiritual direction of oceanic oneness. Not the oceanic oneness of primary narcissism, but a oceanic oneness of spiritual enlightenment. So Patanjali is not going into those details, but he is saying oneness with a practice oneness with a good object. It can be a real object in the outside world, it can be a human person, or it can be an internal object. But you have to be conscious about that object. It cannot be an unconscious process. It's a very conscious process Patanjali is referring to. This kind of approaches psychoanalysis has never practiced. In fact, it's feared that we might be precipitating a psychosis by getting into this. There's too much of phobia of innovative inner world. So this is one way. Patanjali says the second way is the mind becomes peaceful, blissful, composed. It gets out of scattering and distraction. There is another way when positive effects are activated. So activation of positive effects of friendliness, compassion, freedom, and a psychological objectivity when the cognitive activity is freed from the hold of affective material. In those states, you develop these positive effects towards objects of pain and pleasure, sin and virtue equally. And that is a state of pure objectivity, integral wisdom, pure observational state, what Krishnamurti calls choiceless state, choiceless self-awareness. Or one can say choiceless awareness if the self is removed, even that is possible. Then Patanjali gives another method that you can get out of this scattering and distraction and suffering and get into state of peace, bliss, productivity, composure, creativity, playfulness, bliss by doing some breathing exercises, what is called pranayama, by controlled inhalation, holding and exhalation of breath. If you do it in certain ways, and these are very popular yogic exercises in yoga, you can learn it from any good teacher of yoga, pranayama, where you learn controlled inhalation, holding and exhalation of breath. And if you do it for a few minutes, the state of mind changes. And this again is one very large area of healing and well-being that psychoanalysis has not touched upon. Many holistic healers in India who practice psychoanalysis and holistic healing both, they give these breathing exercises to their clients for control of anxiety or at times control of anger. And this, I should not say the control, I should say management of anxiety and management of anger. It is not control in the sense of suppression or repression. It is what is meant by management is essentially relief and healing. So one more method. So obviously, when we translated this one way, we were right, because in the subsequent sutras, Patanjali is giving a variety of methods for healing oneself out of this scattering and distraction and the suffering consequent to it. Or the pleasant steadiness of mind can also arise from one's own intrinsic nature, one's basic personality. In some people, the basic personality is so structured and they are lucky enough to have good experiences in early childhood. They are also lucky to have good karma and a good journey of the self route program that the pleasantness and steadiness of mind arises naturally in them out of their own basic personality. And what happens is they are able to tap into the layer of causeless bliss and happiness that is inside of us. And they are able to tap into steadiness, the reliability of the inner and the outer world because of their nature and their early life experiences. So they can get into this state without doing much by just being in their basic personality, what they really are. And we are not talking of the basic personality in spiritual terms, we are talking in psychological terms. One point 36, or owing to a mind full of positivity and light. This usually is attainment of a spiritual path if you practice certain spiritual disciplines for long enough and your program of life is of a particular type, that you enter into a state where the mind becomes full of positivity and light. And if that becomes your new normal, then you are by and large in that state, a good state of mind, and you can come out of it if ever you get into distraction and scattering and suffering by just reminding yourself of the normal state of mind of positivity and light that you usually are. So for this group of people, just recollecting of what is normal for them can bring them into this state. Or one can be in a state of scatter and distraction, and one can work spiritually towards establishing a mind full of positivity and light. You can contemplate upon these two good virtues, positivity and light, psychologically, and the contemplation slowly leads to establishment of these qualities in the mind. Or when the mind is free of the objects of desire. For most people, this is not possible because it's not easy to be free of objects of desire. Those who are on the spiritual paths, even for them, it is not easy. Occasionally, there can be states where one experiences freedom from objects of desire, or one can even experience dejection towards objects of desire. And those can be temporary states of freedom from objects of desire. But it's very difficult to achieve peace of mind by practicing this path. It's only in later paths of spiritual evolution that this becomes possible. Or with wisdom arising from the knowledge of sleep and dreams. This can help us because dream analysis is a very powerful tool to tell us what is happening in our unconscious mind, what is the trouble and how to solve it. And this is my area of interest. If you like more on this, you can read my book on dream analysis. And I have outlined there different ways of doing dream analysis using different schools of psychoanalysis and different schools of Indian spirituality. So if we go deeper into the knowledge of sleep and dreams, we are able to clear out our mind. We are able to overcome pathology. And dream analysis is extensively used by psychoanalysis. So here there is a strong confluence of psychoanalysis and Patanjali. Using the knowledge of sleep and dreams to overcome the scatter, the distraction, the pathology, with wisdom which arrives out of knowledge of sleep and dreams, and thereby enter into a state of peace, bliss, composure, rest, relaxation, productivity, creativity, playfulness, wisdom. Or through any meditative method suited to oneself. This also psychoanalysis does not use. It's a very large area and there are different types of meditation. Individual meditation or group meditation. active meditation or passive meditation. There can be active meditation also where you do certain activity. Meditation need not be passive. Most people believe sitting all alone and closing your eyes is the only way to meditate. That is one particular form of meditation, but there are many other forms. This classical understanding relates to individual passive meditation, but there are individual active meditation as well as meditations, as well as group active meditation and group passive meditation. So this is a very large area of self-development and a storehouse of techniques which psychoanalysis has not yet used. Many holistic healers in India who practice both psychoanalysis and Eastern holistic healings, they refer certain meditative techniques to clients, not to be practiced in the therapy room, but between the sessions on a self-work basis. So any meditation suited to oneself, it may involve an object, not involve an object. It may be passive or active, individual or group. It may just be observational, or it may be involve contemplation. It may involve even focus on one particular feeling. Say the feeling of courage, the feeling of bliss, or the feeling of playfulness. There can be any objective of meditation and any object of meditation and any process of meditation and any setting of meditation and any goal of meditation. The goal of meditation can be peace. It can be to enhance concentration. It can be to develop paranormal abilities. It may be to deepen the bliss, to deepen the rest. It may be catharsis. In many of the group meditation exercises, for example, take a very popular meditation exercise called AUM, Awareness, Understanding and Meditation, offered by University. It's a group meditation, and the goal of that is catharsis, exactly like we would do in ISTDP or emotion-centered therapy or anger therapy or some forms of EDT. So through any meditation which you find suitable to yourself, you can overcome the pathology, the scatter, the distraction, and get into a peaceful, blissful state of mind. And once you are established in that state of oneness, peace, bliss, composure, unaffected by the positive and negative effects, in that state, you slowly start developing mastery from smallest to the largest issues that confront your mind. The smallest to the largest, right, essentially is psychological in nature. We are not talking of destroying planets by thinking about it, not that kind of an ability. So when we say smallest, the Sanskrit is param anu. Anu is the smallest. It is not the atomic, it is actually the smallest. Atomic happens to be in one context the smallest. So it does not mean you can change the nature of the atom, or you can change the laws of nature, or you can cure all the incurable sicknesses from this world, or you can change the laws of nature, or you can change the cosmology of this universe. But essentially, from the smallest to the largest of psychological issues, the mastery extends. And one area where it will also go will be the area of psychosomatic sicknesses and certain parapsychological areas which are related to psychology. and certain areas of spiritual and philosophical explorations which are based upon the state of self-development. So these are the areas where the mastery will extend from the smallest to the largest. One interpretation of this is also made in a literal sense, because in the next chapter, Patanjali talks about the siddhis or extraordinary powers or attainments on the yogic path. And there he talks about the ability to become small or become large. And there are two interpretations. One is that physically you can become small or large, or the second is that the consciousness identifies from the smallest to the largest. The physical size is not varying, but the identification of the consciousness is varying. You can identify with the whole of the universe, or you can identify with the smallest element in the universe and everything in between. So these interpretations exist. Safe interpretation would be that the mastery extends from the smallest to the largest of psychological issues and to a large area of spirituality, philosophy, parapsychology, and mystical parts of reality. So this brings us to 1.40, and we still have a lot of time. So we will take up the next part, Sutras 41 to 51. So let me have a cup of tea and come back to you. Any questions, write to me, hvindia@gmail.com.